All right, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started, even though some folks are still signing on. It is my pleasure to be with you today on behalf of Heather Sanderson and the Sanderson firm. I have with me an esteemed colleague, someone who I love presenting with, Sean Dean. We're going to get things kicked off here. We'll be presenting on confidence after closure, the smart approach to MSA administration. So I'll introduce myself and then I'll pull up our slide deck here while Sean is introducing himself. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Annie Davidson. I am an attorney by trade. Happy to be over here at Sanderson Firm. I've been in the industry quite a while. Prior to that, I was a litigator. I did insurance defense. I handled work comp liability and no-fault cases for carriers and self-insureds, and I practiced at a mid-sized firm in Minnesota. So happy to be with you. Sean, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Annie, to you and to the Sanderson firm for having me. It's always a distinct honor to get to present with you. You're one of the most experienced MSP practitioners in our industry. I've learned a lot from you over the years. Much like you, we have very similar pedigrees, insurance defense background. Myself, been practicing in Medicare secondary payer for going on 18 years.
So for those of you who maybe your first webinar with us, we have a little screen here about us. We're women owned, if you didn't know it. Heather Sanderson founded us about 5 years ago, coming up on 5 years ago. We've got a national footprint servicing clients all across the country. We solely focus on Medicare secondary payer compliance and all pillars of that: conditional payments, Section 111, and Medicare set-asides, which is our focus today. And we're comprised of legal, clinical, and claims professionals. I think we're approaching 70 employees, so this will be updated by the next time you see us, and combined experience of well over 500 years. So that's a little bit about us. Sean, do you want to tell us a little bit about Ametros?
Sure, yeah, I would be happy to. Thanks, Annie. We've been around since 2010. We are the only pure play professional administration company in the country. And what I mean by pure play is, whereas Annie and the Sanderson firm, they do Medicare set-asides and conditional payment recovery and Section 111. We don't do any of that stuff. We stick to one lane and we do professional administration. So we administer those Medicare set-asides after the settlement, or could administer a medical cost projection or even a life care plan, or work with the trust company. We are just shy of 200 employees. In fact, we actually might be at the 200th employee as I'm saying this. And we're just shy of 33,000 members on our platform, hold about a little over $4 billion under funds under management. And big news for us is that in January of 2024, we were acquired by Webster Bank, which is, I think, the 20th largest bank in the country. So it's a great fit for us, incredible amount of resources to grow and serve parties who are settling cases and injured individuals after settlement.
Awesome. Yes, it was fun to watch Ametros grow over the years. I wasn't there like at the very beginning, but pretty close to it when I was in private practice. I had started working with y'all. So thanks for doing that intro and familiarizing the audience with that. We'll get started here. Our agenda today is pretty standard in terms of talking about Medicare set-asides and professional administration. We've got some case studies. That's really the meat and potatoes that we want to get to. But before we do that, we recognize, right, not everybody's as familiar with Medicare secondary payer or Medicare set-aside, so we'll just do a quick level set. I'll talk through a little bit about the MSA changes and trends, and then we'll move into the impact of MSAs and professional administration of MSAs on overall settlements. We'll talk through the benefits of professional administration, and then we'll get to those case studies. And then before I get started, because of course, this whole year has been, just fascinating in terms of dealing with Medicare. I think many of you know I'm serving as the president of the National Medicare Secondary Payer Network. Sean has served as a past president. It's always a fun ride. It's been challenging for me this year in that Medicare was in that communications freeze that we talked to you about earlier this year for most of like the first quarter and maybe a little bit into the second quarter. And then CMS was just getting ready to have a webinar and announce some guidance updates on October 1st when we went into a government shutdown. The government shutdown just lifted. And as of just like around, 4 or 5 o'clock last night, a bunch of us in the industry, we all got our alerts that there is a new NGHP user guide that's been released. Medicare has released its annual list, ICD-10 code, ICD code, I should say, whitelist. So we see that every year. And they released their notice that they send out, their memo every year about the reporting and recovery threshold. So the reporting and recovery threshold remains at $750. Which has been there like that for about a decade. We'll have a blog up about it shortly, and you probably can't miss the news in the industry. So keep an eye out for it. Medicare did issue some guidance around reporting WCMSA information. So we'll touch a little bit on that in the slides, and I'll mention anything that's relevant, but then please keep an eye out on our blogs, and I'm sure Mitros might have a blog about that down the line. Anyone in the industry is probably reading through this right now and getting information out to their readers and watchers and all of that. So breaking news, but that's not, the sole focus of what we're talking about today. We'll get right into our topic. Okay. Level set Medicare eligibility. We're talking about people who are on Medicare or who are about to get on Medicare. So for figuring out if somebody's on Medicare, we're talking about people who are 65 years old or older. Folks who've been diagnosed with end-stage renal disease, right? They've got kidney issues going on, need a transplant. There's a fast track onto Medicare that way. There's a fast track onto Medicare also for folks with Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS. And then for folks receiving Social Security disability insurance benefits for 2 years or more, that's also a pathway onto Medicare. So it's important to note that it's not just for people who are over the age of 65 that qualify. There can be folks of kind of any age. Fun fact, I consulted on a case just a few months ago. It was a liability case, and infants who have end-stage renal disease, there's a pathway onto Medicare for them. There was a child born with a diseased kidney on a case I consulted on, so add that to my repertoire. It's truly anyone under the age of 65 may qualify based on different criteria. So please, please, please don't fall into that trap of just thinking somebody has to be over 65 or age 65. In terms of a level set, we talk about Medicare secondary payer. There's 3 different pillars like we talked about, like I mentioned a minute ago. Mandatory insurer reporting, we've got conditional payment recovery, and then you can see what's lit up on the screen is Medicare set aside. That's really where we're gonna hang out today. What's fun about the Medicare set aside realm is we have agency guidance, but there's really nothing in the statute or regs requiring Medicare set asides, requiring you to go through the submission process. But we certainly have sub-regulatory guidance. I would expect we might see an updated WCMSA reference guide soon too. CMS usually likes to drop updated guidance in October. I think they had planned to. Sean and I were just talking about this before we went live. The user guide that dropped last night is technically dated October 6th. So they plan to release it last month. So stay tuned for that. But we'll focus on Medicare set-asides. If you don't know what a Medicare set-aside is, we've got you covered. It's basically the portion of a settlement that is designated to be used to pay for future claim-related medical expenses that would otherwise be paid for by Medicare. So, right, you have an injured individual, it works in work comp, it works in liability, but the underlying goal is to make sure that there is a pot of money there used to pay for their care and to not cost shift onto the taxpayers. So we're estimating as accurately as we possibly can that total cost for future expenses that Medicare would otherwise pay for related to that claim. And then that typically goes over the person's life expectancy. You can use rated ages. Some jurisdictions have statute of limitations, right? So that might be, in Georgia, you have a 400-week cap. In some states, it's, 6 years or 4, something like that. So, but it's typically thought to be over their life expectancy, and they're supposed to use it to pay for their care as part of their settlement, judgment, award, or other payment to close out their case. This is our best practice slide. What's fun about this is, I say fun tongue in cheek, Medicare kind of changed things in April of this year, and it kind of was meant to get at some behavior that Medicare had seen over time. So this best practice is, as a general rule, this has always been the general rule. A Medicare set-aside is appropriate when future medicals are being released, that claimant who is injured requires some claim-related Medicare-covered medical care, and that claimant is either on Medicare or has a reasonable expectation of getting on Medicare within 30 months of the date of settlement. The note I have at the bottom says, Medicare set-aside workload review thresholds are for submission, and they're irrelevant when you're determining whether or not to fund an MSA. So what do I mean by that? There used to be a lot of folks out there who would settle claims for $24,999.99. I may have helped folks do that in the past. People were treating Medicare's workload review thresholds as a safe harbor. They were never intended to be a safe harbor. Nonetheless, folks were doing it. Well, Medicare would see those $24,999.99 settlements because any claim involving a Medicare beneficiary that settles for more than $750 has to be reported to Medicare via Section 111 mandatory insurer reporting. So this was a huge tip-off to Medicare that folks might be using their workload review thresholds as a safe harbor. So again, this is the best practice. I'm going to talk to you about those workload review thresholds here in a second, but this best practice has really supposed to have been your best practice since 2001. Certainly a lot of behavior has changed this year. So what am I talking about when I say Medicare set-aside submission thresholds? Medicare has had these in place since the inception of the program back to 2001, and you can get a Medicare set-aside, again, voluntary, right? And if you want Medicare to look at it, you can participate in their voluntary program. In order for you to participate, the Medicare the claimant has to be a Medicare beneficiary, and the total settlement amount must be greater than $25,000. So you have a class 1 claimant is a Medicare beneficiary and the settlement amount is greater than $25,000. Then you can submit an MSA to Medicare and ask them for their review and approval. You can also go to Medicare and ask them to look at a Medicare set-aside if you're settling with somebody who has a reasonable expectation of enrolling in Medicare within 30 months from the date of your settlement. And you're settling for more than $250,000. So what's funny about this is everybody could have gone up to $25,000 with those Medicare beneficiary claims. They didn't have to be $24,999.99. What do we mean by reasonable expectation? Reasonable expectation is defined by Medicare as that individual claimant has applied for Social Security disability benefits. They have maybe been denied in the past and they're appealing or they anticipate appealing that decision. Maybe they're in the process of that appeal or they're refiling for benefits. That all counts as somebody having a reasonable expectation. Medicare says that person might get on Medicare within 30 months of the date of settlement. If the person is age 62 and a half years old, that is 30 months, right? It's 30 months from the time they will turn 65. So they're going to be age eligible within those 30 months. The claimant has been diagnosed with end-stage renal disease condition, but they're not yet qualified for Medicare yet. They're in the process of onboarding. Those are folks that have a reasonable expectation of getting on Medicare. You could also have somebody who's over the age of 65 who hasn't yet enrolled, and they kind of perpetually are, have a reasonable expectation. There is an open enrollment period. It's going on right now. It goes on every year. It usually goes from about mid-October until early December. And so we're in that period now. If you watch TV, if you're, listening to the radio, those kinds of things, you can't avoid, particularly the Medicare Advantage plans and advertising. So that's what's going on this time of year. And so anyone who's over that age of 65 could basically enroll during this open enrollment period. So keep an eye on those folks too. Ultimately, if you want to participate in Medicare's submission process, if you work with us and you're one of our clients, thank you so much for your business. And of course, a lot of what we do are non-submits and indemnified MSAs. That is what we're very well known for in the overall Medicare space. We do submissions, of course, as well. So if you are, participating in the submission process, you have to have we have to provide the total estimated settlement amount to Medicare. That's a threshold call, right? Are you over the 25,000 or over the 250,000? It's just a call Medicare wants to see and make sure that they're, looking at it for the appropriate reasons. Medicare needs an executed consent to release form or a HIPAA form that contains that information for a consent to release. It has to be initialed and signed by the claimant. So you can't submit to Medicare without the blessing, essentially, of the injured individual. They have to sign off on it. Medicare wants to see the first report of injury or the FROI or some other explanation as to why that FROI doesn't exist if you don't have one. So this could be information from pleadings. It could be information you get from reports, medical records, or expert reports. I have those listed on there on the slide too. So Medicare wants to know basically what's the nature and extent of the injury, what's the mechanism, what's alleged. So you can use pleadings for that too. And then Medicare likes to see the most recent 2 years of treatment and pharmacy records. I think this is the piece that really trips up people the most, because if the person hasn't treated in the most recent 2 years, you really don't have anything to provide Medicare. And Medicare wants you to prove a negative. Prove to us that this person hasn't treated in that time period. That can be really challenging in the work comp space in the world that we all live in. So that's what Medicare wants to see, though, is those most recent 2 years of treatment records, pharmacy records, a pay history outlining that. That's really what's needed for submission. So I just wanted to cover that. For those of you who participate in the submission process, please know for us and for any other vendor in this space, it's not us kind of pushing you to get those records or to try to prove that negative. That really is a Medicare piece there. We did include the statistics. This is available on Medicare's website. Typically, we would have updated statistics by now as well. It's November. We don't have them. Maybe they'll drop this month. Maybe they'll come out in the next few months. Medicare's certainly been fully funded. Medicare did not shut down when the government shut down, nor did the recovery contractors or the WCRC contractors. So you really shouldn't have seen delays with respect to Medicare set-asides being reviewed or other work. There may have been some things here or there, like regional offices and things like that. But in general, Medicare's continued to process the submissions. I think the main takeaway here is that the numbers are sort of dropping in terms of how many MSAs Medicare is reviewing. You can see in 2020, there was over 16,000, and then you see a drop over the years. Not everybody is participating in this program anymore. There are certainly some significant issues and barriers to submission. So just keep that in mind. So that's where we're at there. In terms of our allocation services that we offer here, we are largely talking about indemnified MSAs. That's our non-submit product. We have our abbreviated MSAs. That is for the cases that settle for $25,000 or less with a Medicare beneficiary now. As of April 4th, Medicare wants to know how much money is being set aside for future care with any settlement involving a beneficiary that's over $750. So with the indemnified, that's obviously non-submit evidence-based. With the abbreviated, it's a non-submit evidence-based, and it's indemnified as well. And that's because you can't submit. You have a settlement that is at like right under their threshold, right? You have to be over $25,000. They won't look at it. But you still need to do something, right? Because you have to report something to Medicare. So that's where that product comes in handy. It's kind of an abbreviated product. It's a 2-page document that kind of outlines what you need. It's looking at the most recent 1 year of care and projecting out from there what you need. It allows you to sort of paper your file and for everybody to move on and feel better about where they're at, just because Medicare won't look at those at all. We have evidence-based MSAs also in the mix. That's our product that we like to submit to Medicare. And we really put, Medicare's feet to the fire a little bit. They said that they will look at evidence-based standards. Okay, well, let's lay it out for you. We'll make the case and really push that issue. So on average, with any of our evidence-based products, we're baking in about 68% cost savings over a traditional or standard MSA. And then if you submit that evidence-based or the EMSA to Medicare, they might counter higher, but almost never to the tune of what an overfunded kind of standard or a regular WCMSA would be. We're also, as far as I know, still the only folks in the industry indemnifying 0 MSAs. So in April, Medicare started requiring that, you report an amount with respect to any settlement involving a Medicare beneficiary when it comes to the future care. Zero is an amount that you can report. They also said, though, that they would stop reviewing as of July, which happened. So as of July 17th, Medicare stopped reviewing and approving zero set-asides. So that's also something to keep in mind. They're still out there. They're still available to you. Medicare codified a couple of the parameters, particularly around legal zeros. So, keep that in mind. It doesn't get into, our good segue to Amitros and John Dean, because there's nothing being allocated there. So we'll kind of turn our attention to those funded allocations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean. We're talking again then about a regular work comp MSA. We're talking about an EMSA. We're talking about a funded IMSA. Any of our products outside of the zeros can be professionally administered, but you got to get to settlement first, right? So you get to settlement with one of these products. What happens after that? Sean?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Annie, and you segued it really, really nicely, and sort of highlighted the MSP process up and through the life of settlement, to the extent there's all these decision points, like, okay, how are we going to protect Medicare's interests? Are we going to avail ourselves to the voluntary submission process or not? How are we going to fund the thing? Are we going to fund it lump sum? Are we going to seek buy an annuity from a life company? And then how are we going to administer it? And that's where we're at here to discuss. And I guess I'll preface all this by saying parties pre-settlement put so much time and thoughtfulness into documenting compliance by utilizing a company like the Sanderson firm, who have experts there who are poring over medical records and determining, looking for cost mitigation opportunities and presenting an incredibly defensible allocation. The issue I see vis-a-vis professional administration is that the second that you give that whatever that amount was on the previous slide, $85,927 is the average, at least with respect to submitted MSA. And we know they run the gamut. Like our smallest case, I think, is like $2,500. Our largest case is $19 million. And Annie, you probably see allocations all the time. It's whatever the medical records in that particular case indicate with respect to considering and protecting Medicare's interests. But the second you write a check to that injured worker and fund that MSA, and they go to Vegas and put it all on red, it's like all of that work is sort of for naught. And I'll talk a little bit about the potential risks inherent there. Now, certainly the payer side has done what they needed to do, but having an individual out there in the wild try to do this on their own in relation to the CMS guidelines is just too tough. So I'll walk through what Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services guidelines are for administering a Medicare set-aside. And the first is that they have to take those funds and put them in a interest-bearing account that they can write checks from, that should be FDIC covered, that's separate from their running checking and savings account. So CMS obviously doesn't want to have someone with 85 or 100 or 250 grand or $1 million sitting in a bank account where they're writing checks for their mortgage or their rent or their car payment or their groceries or something like that. It makes record keeping too difficult for that person. The second and most critical thing that they have to do is only expend those funds on Medicare covered medical expenses associated with the underlying injuries that were related to that work comp or potentially liability injury. And it seems on its face like it's pretty easy. It's only two gates that you got to run them through. Like, is it covered by Medicare? Well, that's kind of easy enough, but probably a lay person might not know that when they're going to treat. And secondarily, they have to determine whether or not it's industrially related. That might be a little tougher depending on the nature of their injuries, but okay, fair enough. Third, they have to account for every single expenditure that comes from that fund. So they have to save all of their medical bills and invoices and document that stuff. And then lastly, and probably the most difficult thing that they have to do is on an annual basis within 30 days of the anniversary date of the settlement, they have to submit what we refer to as attestation information to Medicare. And that's a reporting to Medicare. Medicare has on the WCMSAP set up electronic reporting. I don't know. I've never heard of a beneficiary signing up for the WCMSAP and going through the process to submit it. But they can fax over to the Benefits Coordination Recovery Center their annual attestation. There's a form they can find in the self-administration toolkit that CMS provides. But our information yields that beneficiaries out there who are administering these on their own are not submitting attestation. And Annie, talked a little bit about this past April 4th, the WCMSA TPOC requirements, at least in relation to Medicare beneficiaries on every single workers' compensation settlement. Medicare is going to know how much the MSA was for, even if it was $0. And I'm glad Annie went through distinguishing these voluntary review thresholds that are workload review thresholds that don't provide safe harbors versus, on the other side, protecting Medicare's interest, which is really the requirement. There's no legal or statutory or regulatory obligation to submit these things, but I get questions all the time on that. So I appreciate, Annie, you going through that. But I guess my point being in regards to professional administration is Medicare is going to know about these cases. The former contracting officer representative for the WCRC came on when they first announced that this was going to be a thing and said, the reason we are doing this is so we can coordinate benefits post-settlement, because up until now, up until April 4th, Annie, of this past year that those things went live,
Yep.
or the reporting requirements went live, Medicare only knew about a work comp Medicare set aside if it went through the voluntary submission process. And as Annie said, not all parties are availing themselves to that. And I won't get up on a soapbox about that, but I guess what I'll say is, how can you expect someone to take opioids for their entire life or get a knee replacement surgery in the last year of your life? Or if they've been adamant they don't want that spinal cord stimulator for the last 10 years, but CMS is requiring it. So I understand why parties opt not to do that. But in any event, Medicare is going to know about it. And so what had happened up until the point of WCMSA TPOC reporting is that when the parties would go through the voluntary review process and the MSA was approved, Medicare would place a code within the beneficiary's common working file. So I tried to keep this not too technical because it gets kind of in the weeds. Every single Medicare beneficiary has a common working file, which is a master electronic record used for billing purposes and coordination of benefits. And when a Medicare beneficiary, at least fee-for-service Medicare, so Part A and Part B, they go treat, Medicare will run that bill through the Medicare administrative contractor. And if Medicare believes funds are available in a workers' comp Medicare set-aside, there's a W code stamped on the common working file with associated ICD codes, and the Medicare will deny payment for that. So point being, if these self-administered work comp MSA folks are out there and they're not reporting attestation information, so Medicare has no idea what's in that account, if they're not being professionally administered, my sneaky suspicion is that within the next 6 months, maybe to a year and a half, we're going to start seeing these waves of folks out there getting denial of benefits, because that's really Medicare's mechanism with respect to enforcement around coordination of benefits, is they just decide to deny that they're not going to pay. You can go to the next slide, Annie. I'll walk through some of these sort of problems and risks with respect to self-administration. The WCMSA reference guide says a whole lot of scary things about what happens if you don't protect Medicare's interests. They talk about subrogation, which I don't necessarily know that I buy. They talk about recovery of conditional payments, which I've never seen them do that. I've never seen the agency utilize the contractor and recover or even attempt to seek to recover post-settlement conditional payments. It's not something they do, it's something they say they can do. In 42 CFR 411.46, they say if you don't protect Medicare's interest, they can disregard the entire work comp settlement. That's pretty wild to think about, a federal provision that would just stomp out or snuff out a state law comp settlement. I've never seen them do it. It would be a very interesting bar journal article to write with Annie if they ever did that. But what they do is that they deny benefits, and because of how the Common Working File is coded, they have a technical mechanism to do that, and that's really the teeth to it. And we conducted a study, Jason Gallant and I, back in I think it was 2020, where we were able to get a hold of some CMS data through a nonprofit educational institution, and we determined to the tune of about 35,000 claims per year Medicare was denying based upon this W code. And like, I get it in relation to the tens of millions of Medicare beneficiaries that are out there, and administrative denials and appeals and stuff, like that's a super small number, but it's not insignificant. And in fact, we need to refresh that survey to see if it's gone up at all. Fortunately, at Ametros, we've never seen denial of benefits. We've seen mistaken denial of benefits where the BCRC just had the wrong information and they didn't process attestation information. But denial of benefits with respect to lack of attestation reporting or incorrect information from the professional administrator, Ametros, to Medicare has never happened, because this is something we just automatically do as a matter of course. But we do get beneficiaries who come to us all the time who say, hey, my Medicare benefits got denied. What can you do? Can you help us? Can you pick up the phone and call Medicare? If they call 1-800-Medicare, they're not going to be able to do that. There will not be someone on the other end of the phone to help them. You have to know the right people to call and the right buttons to push to get their benefits going again. But it's also what makes reporting and the services the Sanderson firm does for its clients so much more important now, because the accuracy of that Section 111 WCMSA TPOC data is really vital, and it's going to affect injured individuals going forward after the settlement. But as far as kind of ticking down the line here, what we see with folks that are trying to do this stuff is first and foremost, it's improper expenditure. One of the first things I did when I started at Ametros, because the bulk of my career was spent serving insurance carriers and self-insureds, and I just didn't have the opportunity to interface with injured individuals who settled their cases. I got on the phone with our onboarding team, and I picked up the headset and sat across from our Ametros rep and listened. And it was eye-opening to see how woefully uneducated these individuals were. And it was thematic too. It was always like, well, my attorney told me I could use the money for anything at all. I thought I was able to use it just like an insurance plan. I thought I could withdraw from it and go on a vacation. I thought I could buy a hot tub. I never heard I could buy a boat. I don't know how that got into our industry. I've never been asked to take a withdrawal from an account to buy a boat. Just heads up, Medicare doesn't cover boats. They don't cover hot tubs. They don't cover vacations. But the second an injured individual does that, they're really on the hook up to the total amount of the MSA or that misappropriated amount of money until Medicare will turn benefits back on. And the biggest risk to that person is loss of Medicare coverage. And when you have an individual who's been in the work comp ecosystem where they've had a claims examiner, maybe a nurse case manager, they have the comp system, which is sort of paternal in nature. They have their own legal counsel almost always if it's a case that's litigated. They have a whole host of folks who are there to help them, and then they settle their case. And on day one, they're sort of out in the wild as effectively as cash payers. And I don't know if any of you have had the misfortune to be a cash payer in our healthcare system in America, but it's super tricky. I actually went through with it. I have two kids, and one of my kiddos needs a very expensive med. And I recently, had left Amitros for a bit, but came back. And I went through a period where I didn't have health coverage for like 2 weeks, and my kid needed a refill on the med. And it was such a disaster trying to negotiate rates with a specialist, trying to even get seen without insurance. And for an injured individual who's had all this help in their comp claim, had doctor's appointments set up for them, and really not had to think about anything, to then just have a pile of cash, 80 grand, 100 grand, $250,000, $1 million sitting in a bank account, going to the point of service and just saying, hey, will you take work comp rate for my, epidural steroid injection? And, just not even understanding how to navigate our healthcare system. So there's going to be administrative errors because of that. They're not going to keep track of their documentation like CMS wants them to. There's no one there to help them at all. It's not a slight against their counsel. Their counsel's job is not to guide them after the settlement. They've done their job. They've got them up to the point where they're out of the work comp system. They're just not equipped to handle this. Most of the time we see them exhausting prematurely, really, really quickly, because in part they're using their funds to on other things. And sometimes their heart's in the right place, and they'll use their funds to do things like pay for their Medicare premium, or co-pays or deductibles or something like that, or buy a healthcare plan on their own. And unfortunately, that's not a permissible expenditure based upon CMS guidelines, and they risk losing their benefits. So this is my plea to all the folks on the phone. The Sanderson firm's doing amazing work for you. Keep that going with professional administration after the settlement, to ensure that all that great compliance work and attention and thoughtfulness that you did leading up to the settlement to keep you in compliance is going to continue forward. So why choose professional administration? I hope I made a strong case that self-administration is probably not the way to go for an individual. They have little to no understanding. There is a toolkit out there, 30 some odd pages of text that I know in best case scenario, sometimes attorneys will print it out and give it to their client, but it's still it's relatively technical. Most people out there don't even do their own taxes. They go to, you can go to H&R Block at Walmart. They're probably not going to be well equipped to handle executing on CMS guidelines with respect to post-settlement administration. Frankly, it's totally unfair to think that someone should be able to do that. We're aware of some work comp commissioners and judges who are really starting to be keen on this stuff and understand that even not speaking relative to incapacity, just the ability for the average lay person, injured worker, to be able to do this. And I think it should.
Sean,
yeah.
I was just thinking, like, when I was in private practice, and maybe it was even just being in the industry now, I think I've heard of like one person who's like successfully done it themselves, and they happen to be an injured worker who was an accountant. You know what I mean? Like, it's really like I, as a lawyer, you as like, I, even knowing what I know, I don't want to do this. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot.
And I'm not saying this is hyperbole. Like, I am more sophisticated than most with respect to professional administration. I wouldn't do it myself. If my mother or father or sister were God forbid hurt in an accident and had to do this, I would have them utilize CareGuard. I wouldn't want to take this on. I wouldn't. I think it's analogous to many things, but I don't do my own taxes, and my taxes aren't that complicated. I'm going to spend a couple $100 every year to have my accountant do that, just so I also, we're all in the insurance ecosystem, and we're trying to push risk off to capable parties who can handle this stuff too. I wouldn't write my own MSA on a napkin, like I would hire the Sanderson firm to do it. Like, it's why we have capable folks out there. And I mean, not to get into this, certainly isn't a sales pitch. This is meant to be educational, but there's no cost to entry into professional administration. It used to be like 20 years ago, you'd see some companies that got spun up where they would charge like 20 grand or they would charge 5,000
Right.
a year. You know, we charge $1,000 flat fee, setup fee. Typically, the carrier pays it or comes out of the settlement. So it's not like an individual can't access this stuff. But kudos to that one person out there who is successfully doing it. I hope that. I wonder if they're receiving savings or they're able to negotiate savings on their bills.
Right. Well, and I'm wondering, I don't think that's in your case studies. I was thinking we've got about 15 minutes left. So if you're okay, I want to kind of move into those.
Yeah, let's go to some of the case studies, please.
Yeah. That's the meat and potatoes here. So do we have, okay, this is it, right? This is the first one.
Yeah. And this one's most near and dear to my heart. I know the member only because they signed a media release that I gave them. So they'd be fine for me to tell them their name, but I still didn't want to, just out of respect. This is an amazing individual. He unfortunately sustained a catastrophic injury when he fell from a roof while he was working as a seasonal worker at a ski resort out west. Sustained a horrible traumatic brain injury. He is a quadriplegic, had PTSD, but has come out of it remarkably well. We've worked closely with him to get him what he needs with respect to mobility equipment and assistance, and he travels all the time. He's come out. We have our annual vision days where we get together. It's like our annual meeting, and he came out and spoke, and it was incredibly inspirational to hear his story. But not just the feel good stuff. I mean, we've saved him a lot of money. We've taken the burden. He had an incredible group of folks that helped him in his claim on the carrier side, including his attorney. Everyone was very accommodating to him. And the second you take, a couple $1 million, you're out. And it's not like you're going to call up your adjuster every day, or you're going to have a work comp hearing or anything like that. But I mean, these are the ones that really are near and dear, because I mean, he's out there speaking on our behalf just because he's so happy, and it warms my heart that we're able to help him in such a meaningful way to where he could continue to do a lot of the things. Obviously he's not out on the slopes, but he's doing some pretty incredible things. He even recently did skydiving is a quadriplegic, but it's pretty incredible.
Which I've done as a non-quadriplegic, and I don't know that I would do it again. I mean, it's intense, man. Like, good for him. I love that.
I didn't know that fun fact about you. I don't think I could skydive. I mean, I think I could fall and out of a plane, but I don't think I would do that.
To be fair, I did it pre-law school. So, my brain is kind of everything now. Yeah, exactly. But can you talk a little bit about, so what the benefits, I sort of see it, like, especially if you use, and this isn't, not to talk about it like our products exactly, but like we like to pair our indemnified MSAs, but of course any of them with your, so we're baking in cost savings there, but then you're not overfunding, you're getting folks what they need, but then when they administer with you, they get access to like a PBM, like PPO, like, because you said you've been helping him with a significant DME. Can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yep. Any category of spend, we have discount partners that we work with. So if there are healthcare expenditures, typically these doctors look to folks like this as a cash payer, notwithstanding all the efforts that we've tried to do to educate providers. And I would say, I'll stand up on my soapbox just real quick. CMS has done a good job with the beneficiary crew. Like, you could tell they've really tried. They've certainly educated the claims payer side. They're working to get to representatives of beneficiaries. There's only 2 documents out there for providers about this stuff. There's a couple MLN, Medicare Learning Network articles out there. Providers have no idea what these things are. So Thankfully, we have a whole provider outreach and resources team that work with these folks. But yeah, if they once they treat and get a bill, they're going to be billed at the usual and customary rate. And we always work to, we can't guarantee savings because providers aren't obligated to take any certain rate, but by and large, we save an incredible amount of money on their healthcare costs. Now, if they go treat for Part D prescription drugs, we have PBMs that we work with to lower those rates. And then even on the DME side, we have DME partners who will reduce costs as well. And even on, we have some catastrophic cases where they're effectively living in a facility. We'll even negotiate rates with the facility. So we're to your point, Annie, like we're always keen on trying to maximize stretching every dollar in that account, so as to not have them deplete or exhaust.
Absolutely. Well, we can move on to that next one. It looks like you've got the head injury case. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, there was a head injury case here, very short life expectancy. There was a pretty significant surgery this person underwent. And this is just illustrative of what we're potentially able to save. They were billed at $52,000, paid at $37,000 for this particular procedure. That was a 29% reduction off that procedure. And overall, through the life of this individual, we've been able to reduce their medical bills by almost 30%. And 68 grand, they would have been in a worse spot had they tried to done it themselves. But some of these savings, I think it's important to point out, but there's the human aspect of it too. If they're doing this on their own, they have no one to pick up the phone and call. We get phone calls all the time from claimants and applicants' attorneys who are looking for guidance on this stuff because they're not experts on it. I mean, they're experts in prosecuting a workers' compensation claim. They have no clue how to navigate post-settlement life for these folks. So even though I'm throwing up the numbers, realize there's people behind these cases here at Ametros who are essentially holding their hand. And these are individuals on average. This person happened to have a 10-year adjusted life expectancy, but on average, the life expectancy is 22 years. So we're partnering with them, with our members, for a really long time.
Well, and another question I have for you, Sean, because right, it's like we work with a lot of self-insureds, and I know you do too, and it's this idea of like, these are your colleagues, right? Like a lot of, they're self-insured for this. They want to make sure that they're taking care of their folks. Mm-hmm. And so really being able to, but also fair arm's length transactions, fair settlements. We don't want to, drive up the cost of work comp coverage. But I think one of the things, when I look at this $450,000 number, one of the things I think about is Medicare says the money needs to go into a separate interest-bearing account. They don't go out of their way to say FDIC insured. And if you think to like the last couple of years, and well, frankly, right now, there's a lot of financial institutions out there that are not banks, that are not FDIC insured. Yeah. Also, FDIC insurance only covers up to typically $250. Exactly. So when you're taking, the $2.1 million settlement, like the last example, or this $450,000 settlement, how is Ametros able to help folks? Because I've also ran into the situation where they hand somebody a $2.1 million check and the person's unbanked. A porter, I've heard him talk about that. I know he's no longer with Ametros directly. I think Andrea succeeded him, but that was always interesting to me, was like, if somebody's unbanked, what bank's going to let you walk in with a $2 million check? They'll lock you out. They'll think it's a scam.
Yep. And
how do you do that?
Yeah. So a few things. CMS says it should be FDIC insured, but they don't mandate it. We've tried. We're hoping at some point that they do mandate that. Unfortunately, I had an individual who came to us as a self-administered person, and they had a significant, they had a Medicare set aside and they had a medical cost projection. The medical cost projection was $800,000 or $900,000, and they had some FOMO because the markets have been doing relatively well, and they had put it in a broad-based index, but then they decided they wanted to play a little bit more aggressive and put it into some individual stocks, and they lost a significant amount of the corpus of the account. We don't do that. These are sitting in interest-bearing accounts that are not at risk of losing the principal, and not to talk bad about any other folks out there, but we're aware of other companies who don't handle the funds the same way. We feel that the CMS guidelines should be abided by there. But that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, thank you for addressing it.
Sure.
We've got
the last
one more case study.
Big savings. Yeah. I mean, 71% here on healthcare expenditures. And I just want to be clear, like, not all cases can we get this type of dramatic savings on a case in relation to $500,000 total settlement amount versus $150,000 or $150,000. 71% reduction. A lot of it depends on the particular case and the procedures that they're having. But here an individual would unlikely be equipped to negotiate a large provider bill like this on their own. Maybe if they had a representative who was savvy, maybe if they were that CPA, or if they had some expertise in the healthcare industry, or they came from the insurance industry, they could. But by and large, our clients aren't, or not our clients, injured workers on their own aren't able to do this. So this is our bread and butter and what we do every day to help our members extend the life of the funds and make it easy for them to treat and make their life easy post-settlement.
And I guess one last question then before we move on to kind of a few announcements in Q&A. Were any of these examples structured? Or do you have an example that comes to mind where, like, what's happening when a temporary exhaustion occurs in these?
Yep. I believe all of these were structured. If a temporary exhaustion occurs in a structured settlement, CMS indicates that they will step in as primary so long as there's a showing that the funds in that calendar year were expended appropriately. And that's a good point, Andy, because I mentioned there's this attestation reporting requirement on an annual basis within 30 days of the anniversary date of the settlement. There's also a secondary attestation reporting requirement, and that's exactly what Andy indicated. When there is a temporary depletion or permanent exhaustion of the fund, it's super critical that you alert Medicare to that, especially even though exhaustion rates pretty low, it can happen, and folks just happen to utilize differently than was anticipated. No person has a crystal ball with respect to allocating an MSA. So maybe they had that unanticipated lumbar surgery and it happened to eat away at the seat amount, and they're waiting for that annual payment to come in, but they're 6 months out. We report to Medicare. Medicare ensures that their MSP records properly coded in the common working file, and they will pick up the charge. Now, what I will say is they need to have Medicare in order to do that. And that's another sort of thing that I think is important too in relation to prescription drugs, is that we've been allocating RX and Medicare set aside since summer of 2009. But if these folks are Medicare entitled but don't have a Part D plan, they need to ensure, and as you said, open enrollments right now, they need to make sure they sign up for a Part D plan. So we also do provide guidance to our members in that regard. We have a special programs team that will assist in providing resources around benefits.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time and for this information today. It's funny, when we were preparing these materials this week, I was going to announce to everybody today, we have no planned December webinar. So this is it. Sean Dean and Annie Davidson rounding out the year, but maybe not, because I just told you that a user guide dropped today. So we have a blog coming out quickly, or it's going to drop right as we're closing this out, or maybe it drops in the middle of this. Please check that out. If there's breaking news when we prepared this, we will let you know. You will hear from us if we're going to do a webinar sooner to kind of go over anything that crops up between now and the end of the year. If you want to be automatically enrolled in any of our webinars, please email us at spotlight@sandersonconf.com, and we will get you enrolled automatically for any of our webinars. That way you'll get the recording even if you weren't able to attend. With that, I wanted to spend just a minute here with our MSP College. You've heard us talk about this before. Sanderson Firm has partnered with Work Comp College, and we offer the MSPA accreditation, the Medicare Secondary Payer accreditation, and the MSACP, the Medicare Set-Aside Certified Planner. Again, we talked about this recently. We only have 24 seats remaining for MSPA Live in Tampa, January 12th and 13th. Who doesn't want to be in Tampa at the beginning of the year? John Dean won't be with us, but Jason Gallant from Ametros will be there. We hope you can make it. Please sign up. And then there's the little bit about MSACP, and then a little bit about our services. Thank you all so much. If we didn't get your questions answered as we went through this today, we do have that log, and we will reach out to you to answer your questions. You've got my contact information here. You've got Sean's contact information here. Thank you, Sean, so much for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who attended today. With that, we'll send you on your way. We're at the 2:30 mark. Please enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks so much.